Good afternoon. I am Robert Purchese, a writer for Eurogamer. Before we start, I just want to quickly use this platform to send my thoughts, and I'm sure everyone else is here, to anyone affected by the horrible events that occurred last night in Manchester. Anyway, back to the session at hand. It's a real pleasure to be asked today to talk with the two people who join me on stage. We've heard talks over the last day and a bit from all corners of what is now a massive gaming industry. We see big studios outside with banners and their blockbuster games, recruiting alongside smaller independent teams who are maybe having their first, pushing their first games. And Poland, thanks to the high-profile work of The Witcher, Dying Light, This War of Mine, and many more, has become a global player in that industry. It's great. But it wasn't always like this. 30 years ago, an industry was sprouting from small seeds, the first shoots emerging from the ground, and the world seeing what they could be. And these two people on stage with me, they were there. They were there helping shape it, helping shout about it from the hilltops. In one way or another, they've helped lead us here. So John and Brenda Romero, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In our talk, I'd like to whiz back through time to when you were starting out, something many people here may be doing right now, and to find out what it was like for you, find out some of the things that helped shape your careers, the challenges, the fame, how you dealt with that, and then talk about where you are now and perhaps a bit about what you're up to. Before we get there, we will have time for questions later, so please have a think now about those. This is fair warning. So let's hop in our time machine, go back to the 80s in the United States and where it all began. Brenda, in your fantastic talk yesterday, you said you began making games when you were 5.
Yeah, I don't know that I get asked that question a lot about, when did you start making games? And I don't remember not making games.
Yeah.
I just don't remember. Even when I got Legos, it was about making levels. And I would create these with whatever Legos I had. I would create these ways for my older sister and older brother to go through them. They were not at all interested. But I don't, even when I started writing, I was making plays. Like I wanted to do something that would affect other people in some way. But yeah, I started making board games when I was about 5.
Do you remember when that changed from making board games into making video games? And then, I suppose, when you joined the industry and realized that, okay, I'm going to make video games?
Vividly. I literally remember where I was sitting. I remember exactly. And I guess it started sort of with programming. My high school got in computers, and if we could code something, we could use it in exams. And that lasted exactly 1 round of exams, because I coded every single thing, so I was done all of my exams very quickly. Like I remember this accounting exam, and I coded how to do all the different types of appreciation and depreciation, and I was finished with my exam in 5 minutes and left, and nobody, and got perfect scores. So that was the one time they allowed that. But then I was at Surtech at this time, so I'm 15, and I found, just like
what was that first job in the industry that you had?
I had the perfect job for a 15-year-old kid. My job was to memorize games, and then when I was the walking, living, breathing FAQ. So when somebody called into Surtech, I would answer the phone, and I had to know the answers to those questions. So I remember there were, just like every desk at the time, had a whole stack of, these folder things with 5 1/4-inch floppies. And on one it said Wizardry Editor. And that was all I needed to know. And then I started making my own levels in Wizardry, and it was just magic, just absolute magic. But the downside is that because I had this tool, this is sort of the path where John and I diverge. Because he didn't have any tools, so he had to make all of his tools. And so he kept going hardcore into coding. But I found this tool that let me make levels, so I just started creating as opposed to being sort of forced to code. So he kept going hardcore down the code path, and I stopped going. Probably first year of college, I took, assembly language and Fortran, but then I went far more into the design route.
Yeah. And so, John, I heard that, you went so far down the coding route, in fact, that by the time you were 15 years old, you were doing code for the US Air Force. What was that? I mean, what were you doing for them?
Well, it's classified, so I can't tell you exactly what happened. But by the time I got to England in in January of '83, I had just learned assembly language. I'd been programming in BASIC for years, and I came to school at the beginning of, it was halfway through the school year, and I wanted to go into this basic programming class because I was able to do that they actually had a class there in England at this American school. And the guidance counselor told me I had to get permission from the teacher to basically let me in, like I wasn't going to be behind.
Yeah.
And because learning how to program back then was a kind of a rare thing. So I met with the teacher, and she asked me what I knew, and I told her, well, I know assembly language and BASIC is whatever. And so I showed her my disks, and I showed her the stuff that I had been writing, games I'd been writing, and she was super, super impressed. And the next morning, going to school, basically second day of school at this new school, and the teacher told everybody to work on this one programming problem, and then she said, come with me, and I basically went with her, and she drove me across the base to this place called the Aggressor Squadron, where they basically taught fighter pilots how to do combat with with Russians, basically, at that time. And so they took me to meet this captain who ran this one division that was trying to basically write software or convert software for how to fly, flight maneuvers against, just anti-combat or combat flight maneuvers. And so they took me into an actual bank vault. It was like they had to do code words over the phone before the vault would unlock and open up. And I went inside the vault, and there was a Chromemco mini computer, which was a pretty big computer back then. I mean, it was big. It wasn't popular, but it was bigger than a home computer. And so they asked me if I could program it, and I got on it, and I saw it was a CPM computer using BASIC, and I was like, yeah, I could program that. So they said, how would you like a job?
That's a pretty cool job to have at 15. Could you tell your classmates about it, or was it all classified?
Yeah, I didn't tell anybody about it. It was classified, and my dad, who...
Even your parents?
Well, my parents told them that I wasn't allowed to actually get any real data to work with.
His dad was in the military.
My dad was in the military,
okay.
so he told them you can't use any, he can't know any real data.
Yeah.
So they said, okay, no problem. Let's give him fake data to work on while he's actually writing the code to do this stuff. So anyway, that's what I did when I was making games the whole time, but that was like a thing to do in the summertime.
Just a summer job.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first game? Do you remember when games became a thing for you? Or was it always as far as you can remember?
I think games were really a thing in, the early 70s for me probably, because I started playing pinball at the prototypical arcades back in the day, because that's pinball machines were in these dark cubes, I used to go to this one in Tucson, Arizona, where I used to live. And it was called Spanky's, and it was a dark rectangle, and it had like a little deli in it, but it had like 30 pinball machines all along a wall. And they're from, the 60s or the 50s all the way up to the mid-70s when I was playing them. And it was really great. And eventually they started putting some video games in there, and then eventually converting all the pinball machines into video games. And so I got totally into video arcade game playing at that point, which is what made me want to make games.
Yeah. Do you remember, or do you both remember your first tastes of success? Maybe that was the moment your parents started believing in this crazy newfangled career that you were doing, assuming they did, and they still do. Do you remember how that changed things for you? Was it a validation that suddenly I can do this? This is a thing that I can make a career out of, I suppose. Yeah,
it's interesting because I don't. Right? I was at one company for 20 years, and the people who were which is too long. I mean, by 20 years, you've learned, unless you own it, you've learned everything there is to know, and it's probably a good idea to go get another teacher. I had great friends there, right? So there was lots of reasons to stay. But I've learned a lot with other people that I've worked with as well. And the structure of the company was such that the employees were kind of, it wasn't like they wouldn't, you know, we can think of different names in the game industry that you would know, but where we were, because first of all, the location of the company, there were literally more cows than there were in the county than there were people. So it just wasn't this thing. You wouldn't vault somebody up and say, oh, look what you wrote or look what you did. And I even remember, and plus, you know, I was making RPGs, right? And, you know, when I was like when I would go to conferences, I would deliberately seek out fairly geeky people like myself because you know, like there's a friend of ours here in the audience, and we could have just discussions with him for hours about the most minute details of systems, and it'll be fascinating. I mean, you guys did that yesterday for at least 2 hours. But I don't remember, like I know that when one project that I worked on got 5 RPG of the Year awards, like instead of feeling like that's right, I felt like, oh, thank fuck, you know, like it was terrifying when you would release a game that meant so much to you that you know, basically coughed up a piece of your soul for it.
Yeah.
And even though you love it and you've given it everything you possibly could, there's still this feeling of like, I hope people like it. So I've never felt that sense of, I guess what you would say is fame, because there's always this, God, I hope I did right by the game.
Yeah.
And then just relief if people receive it well. You know, like I don't know, and even like we're game developers, right? So like what passes for fame for game developers probably doesn't pass for fame anywhere in the real world.
How about you, John? Do you remember the first moment of success? Was there a moment that constitutes that in your memory?
Well, I think probably the first big moment of success was when I got my first assembly language program working. I was really, really happy about that because it showed that from the little bit that I'd read of in this book that it worked, and I understood how it worked, and that was amazing. So that was a huge, huge win. And then when I got my first game published or accepted by a magazine, because I had so many rejections because I made so many games, and I sent dozens of games in to many magazines, and they all rejected them because they just weren't good.
Did you ever feel like giving up? Did you ever feel like perhaps that wasn't the way you should go?
No, because I kept on getting better at making things. So I knew at some point, like, where is the minimum? Where's that minimum where I'm going to actually do something that somebody thinks is fun? And so I finally did that. You know, it's kind of funny how there are examples of really great stuff out there. There's all these arcade games, and I want to make games like these arcade games. And even if you try to clone them, it's hard to actually make it feel the same way as the original. So it's just hard to make games in general, even when you're trying to copy something. So finally, when it works, you know, it's a big win. And my big win with that was a game called Scout Search in 1984. That was a combination of BASIC and assembly language, and it was just the perfect combination of it that the magazine would want to publish it. That's not to say that the game could have been much better if it was all in assembly, but it never would have been published.
Yeah.
So getting my first game accepted to get published in a magazine was really cool, and that was 1984. And then I kind of worked to basically hone that formula and get a lot of my games into magazines and stuff after that point.
Yeah. Brenda, you mentioned that where you were working at the time, there were more cows than people. What was the development scene like in America back then? Because, you know, here we are at a conference where it's, you know, internet, people making games from all over the world, you know, people in Poland, people from the United States. What was it like back there? Was it disparate? Was everyone spread out? Or was there a sense of community?
I think it depended on where you worked. If you were in California, there was a definite sense of community because there were users groups where people would get together. I would say that once he and his family moved to Rockland, he had much more access to technology. In northern New York, where I grew up, it was not a well-to-do area. I didn't know anybody who had a computer, and the only reason I had access to one was because I worked at a company and they let me stay as late as I want. I mean, my family certainly could not have afforded a computer. We were later able to get VIC-20, and I was coding on that, but So no, there really wasn't much of a sense of camaraderie. I mean, I was super lucky. I got to work with Robert Woodhead and Andrew Greenberg, who, those names may not be well known, but the work that they did directly leads to Final Fantasy, which they cited that as an influence. And Peter Molyneux has talked about Wizardry as one of his primary influences. So I was really lucky, like right out of the gate, I was able to work with those two people and sort of see behind the scenes. But it didn't feel, this is 81, and I still went to college, and I was planning to go get a real job, right? Because this fun thing I was doing during the summer, it didn't occur to me that this was an industry, because I simply I didn't have the same insight that John did. He and I met, in fact, and back then we met in 87 when he was at Origin Systems. So we've been friends since then. We're now obviously more than friends.
Did you guys get on initially?
Yeah, I mean, we've always gotten along. We have, even when we would see each other at conferences, we'd get together and play board games, which is, things are pretty much unchanged since 87, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, do you remember the early scene?
Oh, man, it was awesome. I was in California, and games were just exploding the way that in the arcades they were exploding. It was like the Cambrian explosion of game creativity back in the arcades, and then the home computer kind of amplified that and allowed different kinds of games to be created that didn't need quarters every minute. So it was pretty amazing to play pretty much every game that came out back then in the early days. And I played them on Atari 800s as well as the Apple II. So I basically memorized the names of pretty much all the people that made games, the years, the companies, the games. I mean, I remember everybody's names back then. They're the guys that built the industry, the people that built the industry. And the industry was founded by indies because there was no such thing as a big publisher back then. It was somebody figured out that they could sell these games to computer stores that were selling, computers. But to go with a computer, they need software, and people like playing games. So independent authors would write these games, and they would find out that there's a place that would actually get them into stores for them. And eventually, those places turned into publishers because they would create this distribution network of all these stores, and they would call them up and get orders, and then they would send them all out. But companies like Broderbund and Sirius and Sierra and just a million of them back then, they were Synergistic was probably one of the earliest big distributors of software before any of the other people got bigger, and so people were writing games at home. They would send them to these companies, and then those companies would get them into stores, and that's how publishers started. It was fully indies. Like, there was nobody in an office.
Yeah.
I feel like you had access, though, to really privileged information. Even though I'm working for the love of God in the industry, I had no access. There was no stores at which I could buy games. There were no stores at which I could buy computers. I didn't know anybody that I definitely knew people who played D&D because I played D&D, but this sense of the broader industry and what was happening, I just didn't have. It's, in some sense, I feel like it would have been, just as easy if I had grown up on an island off of Ireland, for the amount of information that I had available to me.
Yeah, I wasn't in Silicon Valley, but it was just 2 hours away from it. It was close enough.
You were close enough.
I mean, Apple was there, all the big companies, Broderbund and Sirius. Actually, Sirius was only an hour from me because they were in Sacramento. So it was, I was right near all of it, went to user group meetings, played every single game, memorized everything, and tried to make the same stuff.
Yeah. So as the 80s give way to the 90s, and that Californian and the gaming scene in general blows up and sort of starts to establish, publishers and things like that, it's around this point that you found id Software, and of course then you shoot to fame for the games you're known best for today, Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, and so on. I find the notion of fame interesting now because we've seen, and Brenda, you talked about this in your talk yesterday, we've seen people like Phil Fish, and in the most extreme cases, people like Notch brush up against extreme exposure. And perhaps game developers, maybe anyone, aren't the people ready for this. They didn't ask for this. Do you remember what it was like for you? Was it nice? Do you remember those days fondly, or was it something that you weren't ready for, and it was difficult?
I thought it was pretty cool when we got interviewed on the radio once. I think that was the very first time that we got anyone from outside that was interested in the stuff that we were making. And this was, I believe, while we were making Wolfenstein 3D, or no, actually it had just released. So in Dallas, there was a radio station that wanted to talk about it because it had just come out. And that was pretty cool. I mean, we'd been making games at that point with Wolfenstein for 12 years.
Yeah.
So it was cool to be able to talk to somebody about our games. And then when we started getting more exposure and magazine articles and the Usenet and then the internet started, it was cool because we could just talk to more people about our games. And it was really nice to connect with the people that played them. Like, I used to get letters in the mail, and I still have them, from people that played my games in magazines and wrote letters through the mail to me about them. But it was neat to see that so many people played games in the 90s, and you could actually go and hang out with them and go play with them. So I used to go to LAN parties with big Doom players, that love the game. And it was, I guess it was just really great to be with the people that played them, because I love those games. I love making them and I love playing them. And it was cool to kind of be around the community.
Did that exposure that you had at the time, did that change your day-to-day? Was it, did things start to become different? Was there more pressure, perhaps, or was it just business as usual?
It was a lot more work handling it, because it was something that we never had to deal with before. We could just focus on making games, absolutely. There was no internet, really. There was no Twitter or Facebook or anything. And there's not even any phone calls. So we just worked, and there was no interruption. And it was really great. And then when more magazines are popping up, and there's more stories to talk to people about, that started eating up a lot of time with interviews in person in the office, and emails, and all this stuff is eating up the time that we used to use to make games. So games slowed down a little bit because of that. And today it's still, there's like information overload today. So it's a lot of filtering now, which was predicted even back in the 80s that filtering was going to be a big deal.
Yeah, so things like Twitter and Facebook and this general proximity that people who play games now have to the people making games is great on one hand, but I imagine also quite challenging on the other hand. What advice do you have to people who may suddenly find their game might suddenly become very popular? Do you have any advice that you've learned over the years about how to perhaps manage that exposure?
I'd say, talk about stuff that you want to talk about. There's a lot of the same questions that you get out there, so kind of field questions, and if there's too many questions that are the same as another source that you've already answered, either create a big, huge FAQ of every question answer that you've done and just copy paste it in, or just tell them you already answered those questions. Because I've done the same thing. I've interviewed people about work that they've done, and they basically have said stuff like, I've already talked this out for so many decades. So I'm like, okay, I won't ask you anything about that. So I understand being tired of answering the same questions and stuff. So just really pick and choose the stuff that you want to answer, and if you can guide the interview in any way for the person to learn things that they never would, questions they would absolutely never ask because they don't know you, they know what you made. I think that's helpful as well for getting yourself out there and letting people know more about you.
I would add, and just an interesting thing, like how much it's changed in the last few years. Like when we released Gunman Taco Truck, we got, oh my God, just absolutely bombed by requests from influencers very shortly after its release. I would say that 95% of the requests that we got for keys were fake. Without exaggeration, like one letter off, somebody's email, the real email has a G and they had a Q. The real email had an L, they had a 1. And so they appear that that they're coming from that person, but you can go to YouTube and check it. But truly, without exaggeration, 95% of those requests were fake.
Wow.
So, that's just something to watch for. But, ultimately, if somebody wants to ask you questions about your work, that's a ridiculous honor.
Yeah.
And I have, to me, the relationships that I have with reporters are really important to me, because I guess you never know, it's sort of, it's an important mutual relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about you getting asked the same questions over and over again about the same games, presumably, I asked you just before to have a think of, because we're running a little low on time, maybe one game that you've made something like 150 games, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so, people know a handful,
Right.
probably. So is there one game, perhaps, maybe one that didn't make it, and that you can tell us about, and perhaps why it didn't make it? Give us an insight into how things kind of pass your test, if you like.
If you look at mobygames.com, you can look at people's names and their chronological, order of the ludography of games from when they first made games up until like whenever they stopped making them or are currently making them. And in mine, from 1982 up until now, it's almost every single year there's games.
Wow.
And there are 4 years that there's not any games. And the reason why is because I was making an MMO at a company that I founded called Gazillion Entertainment. And I worked on it for, it was 4 years. I was at the company for, over 5, something like that. And it was a really great game.
Is this Redwood?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an amazing MMO. It was an MMO for kids that was designed like World of Warcraft, but it had stealth math, conceptual learning, not really learning, but maybe exposure in it.
Yeah.
Without typing numbers and stuff. It was, we had a huge learning design team that was pulled in from Lego Mindstorms and Leapfrog and every kind of educational institution, plus teachers, and we had an educational advisory board that was global, Singapore, England, everywhere. So math was being globally represented correctly with the way that we were presenting it, which were interactions that no one had ever seen before. Because the only kind of interactions that people were exposed to were in books, and these are like really cool, interactive, non-book things that were pretty innovative. And the game was top quality. It was as quality as World of Warcraft. And the game did not come out because of the technology that we were using had an issue where the world got to be a certain size and then the whole thing basically broke. And when it broke, it was either we have to replace a big piece of the tech or we have to transition the game itself, the design, over to a different engine and all the assets. But either way, we're looking at a year at least of work to get this thing back in operation. And when you have 100 people on your team in front of your office, you can't let people sit there, 100 people sitting for a year, because they're not all useful in that transition period.
Yeah.
So we basically had to decide to just stop making the game because we just could not eat a year of a bunch of people and then having to build them back. All the institutional knowledge that was be lost during that time, it was just pretty devastating. But basically the lesson learned is like, don't use a third-party engine that has not delivered a game before. It was a brand new engine. So that was it was great though. It was really great working with those people. They're all really great, very, very professional. And it was a lot of, tons of learning in many different vectors for me at the company. But it was a good experience.
Is it 150 games later? Is it hard still coming up with game ideas?
Actually, it's not. No, there's an infinite amount of ideas.
I mean, if anything, like I guess there's something like the older you get, the more zero sum you start thinking. Like I'm aware I only have so many years left. Like I never thought like this in my 30s, right? Like I only have so many years left that I can work the way I like to work, which is sometimes obsessively, until the math feels just right or whatever. That I only have so many years left that I can keep doing this. And so I have, very personal discussions with game ideas. Like, is this worth it? Is this really worth me going? Or is there some other idea? But no, like while we were here, I mean, I think it's fair to say accidentally came up with a game idea that I think we're going to make. I mean, we've already got stuff in the works, but
so that wasn't a thing before you got here?
No.
And then, wow.
No, it wasn't a thing. It was sort of a thing. There was like this little nugget of an idea that just ricocheted off something else and became. But no, it's God. There's far more game ideas than there's time to make them.
Yeah, I mean, we've been at Disneyland in line to get on Space Mountain and invented games.
Yeah.
Just in line, because it's just, you can't stop doing it.
Yeah, it's if one game designer is married to another game designer, it's kind of a constant mess. It's just happening.
I can imagine. So one recent idea that you came up with was a game called Black Room, an old-style first-person shooter. You know, something I guess people would describe as a John Romero game. What constitutes a John Romero game? There's 150 of them. The campaign was struggling a bit on Kickstarter, so you hit pause on that so you could go off and make a prototype. That was roughly a year ago. How are things going with Black Room?
Well, interestingly, we cannot talk about Black Room. At some point in the future, I definitely will.
Okay.
But I can't say anything about it right now.
That sounds like a good sign to me. And are you working on anything else at Romero Games at the moment?
Yes.
Good.
Top secret. You know, when you're working with a publisher, the publisher has a marketing department and a PR department, and they're the ones that are responsible for talking about what's happening, and they don't want the developer to talk about the game before they've played all the plans.
We can't confirm it's a game.
So
it's a game that uses code and art and audio. And
so we can't be the first ones to spill the beans on anything.
And
we have
heavily
to,
involves
let them
the
do
use of spreadsheets on my part. Yeah, we can confirm those things.
We will open this to questions soon, so do keep thinking. But just before I move on to that, Brenda, roughly 10 years ago, you began work on a series of games called the Mechanicus Message. And these are non-digital works, one-offs, more like installation pieces, really, that experiment with what the idea of a game is. And they're fascinating, thought-provoking games. Games that teach about slave trade, about Irish persecution at the hands of the British in the 17th century, and about sending people on trains to Nazi concentration camps. You know, things, these incredible big ideas. One of them is a game called Black Box, which is this literal black box, a renovated old machine, I think, which was designed to be played once and by only one person, which is you, and it's now in an end state forever. Where did the motivation for this series come from?
Well, that's Black Box. That's the game. That's what that game is about. I guess the best way I can say it is in 2006. 2006 was, the end of 2006 was a profoundly bad period for me, and I don't mean like slunk into a depression. There were let's say truly traumatic events that happened to me at that point in time. And if I were a writer, I might write about it. And if I were, I don't know, like you think of Eric Clapton writing Tears in Heaven about his son. If I were a musician, I might make a song about it. But I'm a game designer, so I made games about it. And during that period, there was just two specific events which happened. It just bad timing, that they happened so close to each other. But I started thinking about these systems of pain and why people would do those things to other people. And out of that, I decided, I was thinking about the game that is Black Box, which I made much later. But I was just really thinking about how that human-on-human violence at scale cannot happen without a system. And if you've got a system, you've got a game. And so I started exploring the idea of making games about these things, and I wanted to make a range of them. And I knew that and these were, you're a writer. I'm sure you've written something that none of us are ever going to see, right? Yeah. It's something that you've written, and I know my brother's a professional musician. I know that he's created songs that nobody's ever going to hear. And so I was making games to see if I could do it. Can we make games, not tell stories, not have cutscenes, but can we make games that mechanically can convey, that can capture and express the same emotion that, say, a great photograph can? So I wasn't ever intending to talk about these games publicly. I wasn't intending for people to get to know them. And when you were talking about success, and John mentioned that point that he got his first your first assembly language program to run, for me, it was when I finished Train, because I'd made a game without any concessions, and I made it as good as, to me, Train was perfect. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, although it sounds it. It was like somebody else might be able to make it better, but I made it as best as I could, and I didn't rush anything. And if you pointed at something, I could tell you the precise reason it was designed that way. And it wasn't designed because, oh shit, we got to release in a week and I have to finish it. That was exactly the way it needed to be. And so when those games became known publicly, I was terrified. There was a lot of like, how dare you make games about these things? And nowadays, like this war of mine, I think, there's games that cause us to question things and to look at things in a different way. People weren't doing that sort of stuff. In fact, people would say, well, that's not fun. You can't make a game about that. And now people don't say that sort of stuff, but they sure as hell did 10 years ago. Loudly, they said lots of exciting things on the internet loudly about those games. But to me, it was something that I became fascinated with exploring to see if you could do it. And I mean, the answer is obviously you can.
Yeah.
And I can do it better with analog stuff than I can, because with analog stuff, I can make you touch it and I can make you smell it. I can make you have like really awkward face-to-face contact with another human being over these things. So as a game designer, I have a lot of experiential things at my disposal that you wouldn't have with assembly language. Yeah. So it's a huge design challenge, which is why I made them. I didn't make them for any other reason than just to see if I could.
Yeah, and there are a few more in development, including one called One Falls for Each of Us, which you're hand-making 50,000 pieces for. Is that right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous and nobody should ever do that, but yes.
Yeah, that is, yeah. And another that you're making from recycled rubbish called City Soleil as well. And another called Mexican Kitchen Workers is sort of on hold because it got disrupted by the whole Trump campaign, I think, and the whole xenophobia and racism that kind of came with that. Do I understand that?
Yeah, so this summer it's my intent to finish One Falls for Each of Us, which is about the Trail of Tears. And then I will probably start working on City Soleil because I feel very anxious about that game. Like I know exactly what I want to do, but I have to finish my game about the Trail of Tears first. In Mexican Kitchen Workers, it's gone through 5 full iterations. And right now it's an interesting math problem, but it's not, it doesn't, what does it convey? What is the greater message of the game? It's not doing it yet. And because John's family is Mexican, I have good insight into that. And I don't know what the game will be when I get there, but I certainly know the things in the last election, even like our daughter, she has an American Girl doll, which are these, they're sort of these fancy dolls, and it's Josefina. She's a young Mexican girl, and Avalon asked us if they were going to be forced to stop making them if Trump was elected president. Wow. And this isn't a kid who reads the New York Times or the Washington Post or watches CNN, but she was even concerned, that the culture that makes up our family. That this election was going to affect her. So we'll see when I get to the game how that affects the ultimate design. But if anything, it has made me even more proud of my family's, when I say my family, I mean my collective family, my family's Mexican heritage, because Mexican people, no matter what has been said about them, are still just some of the happiest, most resolute, most determined people that I've ever known, most loving, caring people that I've ever known.
Yeah. So one quick question before we open to your questions. So making games evidently runs in the Romero family. I imagine it might even be hard to escape from. So recently you released a Gunman taco truck, which was made in collaboration with your son, Donovan. A project that he pitched to you when he was 9. He pitched you a project.
Yeah, I even recorded. Yeah, so what happened is he and John do coding lessons.
Okay.
So I came by and he had, so what's the name of the game? And they always come up with the name of the game and an idea. So he said it was Gunman Taco Truck, which I love the name instantly. And so then that night he came down and he said, Mommy, I want to tell you about the game. So I grabbed my phone to record him like any good game development parent would. And I started recording it. And so he pitched the core loop, and like he knew what it was. Like we don't talk to our kids. Well, let me phrase it. We talk to our kids as if they're game developers. So when they say things like, oh, this game is super fascinating, we don't say, that's great. We will say, what's interesting to you about it? What's the core loop? Like, which system did you prefer? So, he's used to the lingo, right? So anyway, he pitched this core loop, and then we decided we liked it. And I posted this video on Facebook, and a bunch of our friends were like, "You're going to make this game, right?" So then we decided, why not? So it was a great lesson for him. And so we ended up making the game together as a family. And then the last probably 6 months of the development, we got more serious, and we're working on it full time, which is why this relatively small game took a couple years to make, because it was a weekend game and an evening game, and then it became a full-time game. Just get it out the door.
Yeah. Is that an experience that you would go back to? Are any of the other Romero children, are they game makers as well? Would you make more games with Donovan? Does he want to make more games?
I think, Donovan wants to make more games when he's ready. So
Okay.
he plays games all the time, and at some point he'll get another idea, and then he'll want to do it. Our oldest son is 29 now, I think,
Right.
29, and he's been a game programmer for years in the industry. So, in fact, he worked at Gazillion back when it was still going. Yeah, so he's with Glue right now, and he's actually working for Tom Hall. He's Tom Hall's lead programmer on the Diner Dash series. So, Michael was part of the team. He was part of the game dev team, and the girls did testing on the game, and Brenda was doing balance and game design. And I was programming, and Donovan was basically making sure, he had to design the whole thing. He had to write it all, draw all the pictures and write down everything, and then we could turn it into an actual game with an artist.
Mesa she's 16, and she was, she's sort of looking like and I think this is part of the reason why the diversification for games is so important. So Mesa, super hardcore WoW player, and she loves games, but the first game that said, my God, I want to make something just like that, was Life is Strange.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to her, the writer for Life is Strange, Christian Devine, was John's childhood best friend. They grew up together. So he invited Christian to the house, which was, I guess, like a Hollywood parent inviting Brad Pitt to the house. Right? She was just beside herself. So she wants to make games as well, and then Avalon can't decide between being a level designer or a chef. So it can go either way at this, or a level designing chef, I don't know. But yeah, it's really, it's pretty hard to escape games in our house, because it's, even though, like, when people talk about a work-life balance, if you deliberately said, like, that's it, it's 6 o'clock, no talking about games. Why? I love games. I don't, like, there's this sort of thing that's like one word, work-life, right? And it's, that's not to say that there's not times that games don't feel like oof, work. But it's, we are constantly talking about games, So it would be really hard to avoid in our house.
Fantastic.
We talk about other things too.
Yeah. Food, Mexican food.
Finally, I would like to open it to some questions then. There are some people with microphones, I think maybe one at the top as well. So please put your hand up and maybe keep it up as well so that we can see clearly the people with questions.
Hello. So I have a question to both of you. So you've made like a bunch of games, and tell me, when you play other people's games, do you still enjoy them as players, or you actually analyze them as game designers, and you cannot just switch to, just relax and play the game? Because like after so many games, it might be pretty hard.
Both. I love playing games. I don't. If I'm going to play a game, I'm going to play it. And I suspend disbelief in everything so I can actually enjoy the thing. And then at some point, if I thought that there was something while I was playing it that was really interesting that could be turned into something else in another game, then I'll analyze it after that point. But a lot of times, I kind of find that my game playing is also kind of analysis, just because when I'm playing a game, I'm looking at everything. And it's because I just love playing games. And so I will look at every texture. I'll look at texture lineups. I'll look at texture changes and contrast and audio and everything while I'm playing it, just to appreciate it. And I appreciate it as part of, I guess, I feel the quality of the game from the analysis of it. And so that's how I enjoy games. I just play them and I look at them and I'm impressed and I just keep on going, and it's just, I guess, all at once.
Like he was playing this year when you were playing Hitman, right? And when he's having a good, it's really funny watching him play a shooter. It's like super funny because he jumps back, right? So his chair moves, And he eventually gets where he's fully stretched out like this, and he realizes like he's way back, so then he gets back closer, but then he keeps doing this. But when he's playing Hitman, he's laughing like totally inappropriately at the most gory stuff. For me, I don't have, the only games that it's hard for me to like you say, suspend disbelief is like an RPG, not an MMO, but an RPG, like a single player RPG, because for some reason I just still see the spreadsheets, behind the scenes, and I become fascinated with the math. But if there's there's games that, John and I guess probably 3 weeks during the end of the year, so over the Christmas time, we're basically playing games nonstop. We're not doing any work. It's like 3 weeks of just like every game developer's dream. We're playing every game we can possibly play. And we will become like, there's specific, like there was a beautiful moment, well, there are more than one, but there was a beautiful moment in 1979 Revolution, which is one of my favorite games last year. And it wasn't that they did anything new. It was just that they did, well, no, that's not true. They did do some things new in the game, but they weren't on the main path. But, there's some beautiful things in that game, or obviously inside. So we'll play a game, and then like inside, I'm like, somebody please play inside so I can talk to them in our office. I was just crazy, please, somebody I know play inside. And same thing with 1979 Revolution or Her Story. So one of us will usually play a game and then needle everybody in the office into playing it as well. Like currently our office is on an absolute Stellaris binge fest. Everybody's playing Stellaris. So yeah, but no, we can still play games. God, it would be horrible if we couldn't. The only thing that's like tough is like right now we're on milestones, and my milestones don't include 12 hours of binge play, unfortunately. So that's the time that's tough. But Christmas period, like that is the milestone for Christmas, is us playing 3 weeks of games nonstop.
And we have 4 kids in the house, so you can imagine how busy it is.
Yeah, I can. Thank you for the question. Anyone else with a question?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the conference. I am a little bit curious about the MMO game that you are talking about, because it seems that could be helpful for having learning kids about it. There is so many plans to finish the development of the game using maybe another engine. The company really hoped that they could finish it at some point, but I don't think that's going to happen. But people that left because most of everybody had to leave at that point. And the things that we learned while making that game basically spawned another company called Brainquake, and Brainquake took some of the interactions that we had done and turned them into iOS and Android apps. They're on the App Store right now. It's called Was It Trouble? WUZZIT, and it basically just shows the mechanical part of this one type of interaction that actually was wrapped up in story and all kinds of other cool stuff. But in the app, it's just the mechanical part of it. And kids like to solve the puzzles and stuff, but it's more fun when there's a reason to do those puzzles, when your reward feeds into the rest of this world that you're in. And that's what we were creating around the MMO, is a place to care about the results of these interactions. So some of the learning is out there in an iOS app that they're trying to get funding to make a bigger thing where they can possibly wrap the education inside of a cool story, but it hasn't happened yet. And it's just hard to get people excited around education that are not in education. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? One at the back, I think, and then one here.
Okay. Hi. Last year we had the comeback of Doom, and it made a full circle with the games using these old kind of mechanics, right? You had multiple guns at your disposal and stuff like that. It was an excellent comeback in the video game industry. So you think that this old type of games like Doom or maybe Quake and the recent, of course, reinstallment of Wolfenstein have a good time of coming back and using this old franchise in this new generation age and perhaps bring them back, shave the dust of them, and just release them again in some kind of new maybe graphics or additional mechanics.
Well, I mean, they've been doing it for a long time. Since I left id, there have been kind of sequel after sequel of the games, and it depends on which game it is. Like with Doom, every new Doom was a reboot of the original Doom. So the latest Doom is supposed to be a retelling of the original Doom again, just the same way Doom 3 was. And Wolfenstein, they did an amazing job with Wolfenstein. Obviously, they're gonna be doing some sequels to the New Order and Old Blood stuff. And Quake Champions is basically the latest Quake. A while ago, I'd heard that they wanted to go back to the original Quake H.P. Lovecraft world that I'd created, but I guess they decided to just go more in the Quake 3 direction, in more into competitive online gaming like Overwatch and Lawbreakers and stuff. So they're still making sequels. They're still making sequels of those brands, and I guarantee there'll be another Doom probably coming out, and another Wolfenstein, and I just hope someone does something with Commander Keen.
Yeah.
I think you could do a cool Commander Keen like the latest Zelda.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's like a challenge, issued challenge. Do we have time for any more questions? Yeah?
Yep, we do.
We do? Any more questions then? One just here.
Hello, this is a question for Brenda and for John, so both. Are there any game titles that you've played or seen then started to thinking that it was exactly my idea? So I don't think about the single mechanic or some small part of the game, but I mean the whole title that you probably didn't do because it was already released.
There's a game that Ubisoft released called The Epic Quest for Mighty Loot that is very similar to an idea that I had for years before, but mine was not a medieval castle-y thing. It was more of a haunted house type game, but it had the same idea where you as a player could decide that you wanted to improve your haunted mansion and make it more trap-filled and dangerous, or you would spend your money on more weapons and ammo and have your character go and attack other people's haunted houses. So you could decide which way you want to play. Do you just want to build, or do you want to play? And you would basically come back to the game the next day or get notifications telling you that X number of people were destroyed in your house because they played it, or that X number of people had beaten your house, and you could watch replays and see how they got past your traps, so you'd want to go back in and spend more in-game cash to upgrade your mansion, so there's no way they could get past that point. And so it was just a creation game and a game that you also played, but in kind of different modes.
But it was a funny meeting because we were working with Ubisoft at the time, and our producer just wanted to introduce us to this guy, and just, he's got this really cool game idea, and so he's telling us about the game idea, and we were in a really early prototyping of it, and the response was supposed to be, "That's cool," and John just said, "Fuck," just like that, like there was nothing else to say. And there's a couple other games that's happened with. We had one idea that was just absolutely, I won't go into the whole story, but it was absolutely outright, that was our idea, and it was shared, and there it was. There were a couple things in the game, there's just the odds of it, well, there were more than a couple things. There was like a literal step-by-step of a specific quest. There's nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, it was ripped off.
So we don't even, like this game idea that I was talking about, you won't see us talk, we won't talk about it in public. It doesn't matter, who's around. We're really pretty close to the vest with stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's gonna happen, especially if you have all these different game ideas. And I remember, like, there's another game, Cannibalt, which is Adam Saltzman's game. It's a great iOS title, one of the early ones, Endless Runner. And when John first played it, I guess that's your biggest compliment you can pay a game is fuck. When John first played it, that's what he said, and he was like frustrated with himself. He's like, I could have done that. I could have done that on the Apple II. I can't believe I didn't come up with that idea. Adam's absolutely great. He's a wonderful game designer. But that was like, I remember your reaction to that game was the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool that there are games today that could have been made on early 80s computers, but they didn't because the design literacy and the design patterns have evolved so far beyond where they were at back then, that huge games today actually could have just been made on ancient hardware at crazy speed still.
I'm laughing just because I was thinking about, like, so there was that compliment. Other great compliments John plays games is when he's playing Hearthstone, and he would, like, try not to throw the iPad, right? Like, try, like, when somebody obviously ruined him, and he would try to, like, he would just, like, throw the iPad, but not so far that it would get hurt, because he would, like, sit there in bed and just go, like, whatever, and then, but if he's playing shooters and it's tough, like, it is it's just, if the kids are in the office, it's more controlled, but if he's really quiet and mild-mannered until he's playing a shooter, and then it's just, it's a mess. It's an
Is there one particular shooter which really sets you off?
Yes. I know, I mean,
Well, no, I
all
love
of
playing.
them.
I actually still play Doom Deathmatch a lot because people want to play me, and they have tournaments all over Europe. So I play a lot more than anybody does.
We had 3 guys come over from Germany. They emailed us, and it was this one guy, when they were growing up, all the time that they were growing up, they would play Doom together, and then we'd come back from college over breaks, and they'd play Doom together. So the best man for his best friend's wedding had John record a congratulations on your wedding, and the guy surrounded by his family and all these little kids, they sent us the video. It was like, fuck, what? And so then his best man said, I know I'm pushing it, he said, which he wasn't, but he's like, would it be possible if we flew from Germany that we could deathmatch John? And I said, yeah, sure, if you're willing to fly to Ireland. So they did, and they ended up playing for 11 hours or something ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
they
had a blast. He destroys me pretty savagely.
I was going to say, are you good?
No.
Oh yeah, in Doom, yeah, definitely.
There's no way, the thing about it is like, I even had this fantasy, like, that's it, I'm going to get halfway decent in Doom. I cannot even see him when we're playing. So, like, it's just, it's not even fair. Like,
I am Doom, so.
Well, yes, but it's like, I just die. But there's one game, like, thank God for Brian Upton, who, Brian is, he designed Ghost Recon, which I think is one of the absolute best shooters ever designed.
Totally.
And I'm good at a sniper, and so I have taken out my revenge many times on John in Ghost Recon.
Yep.
So without Brian, yeah.
Okay, do we have time for any more questions?
Sorry, would we need
We
to finish?
don't, all right. Then all I'm left to say is thank you very much to Brenda and John for being very gracious guests.
Thanks for
Thank you.
listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank you very much.